There are only about 23 known true first editions of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Lewis Carroll, the author, canceled the first printing because John Tenniel, the artist, complained about the printer's handling of his illustrations. If we were to rank these few copies that leaked out, starting with the most popular, or the most valuable, or even the most important, on the top of my list, whatever qualifier we use, would be the so-called file copy. Today I would like to run through the genesis and the provenance of the so-called file copy, and end with a surprising detail about one of Teneal's drawings tipped inside. A detail that would surprise even the most die-hard Lewis Carroll aficionado. Welcome to Stuffing the Teapot, or Talking All Things Lewis Carroll. My name is Matthew Demakos. I am a member of the Lewis Carroll Society of North America, and for the last 20 or so years I have been researching and writing about Lewis Carroll. For the last 3 or 4 years I've been concentrating, however, on John Tenniel, the artist who illustrated Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and the sequel, Through the Looking Glass. The pages for the so-called file copy first appear in a London bookseller's catalogue by the name of Tregascus. The catalogue is dated July 4th, 1898. That's 36 years to the day that Lewis Carroll first told the story of Alice's adventures to 3 little girls and a friend of his on a boat trip. The pages are item 158 in the catalogue. They are described as the author's own copy in sheets, folded ready for binding, some pages scored by him in the outer margins, entirely uncut. Somewhere in the packaging, Carroll wrote, A/65 in sheets. We can see that the next item is also a book, not even bound. It's a Through the Looking Glass, an uncut copy, only in sheets. And the next few pages of the catalogue have other items related to Lewis Carroll. Some of these items came from Carroll's estate auction that was held the previous May. Carroll died the previous January, but some were not in that auction. These 2 items were not in the estate auction. I'm assuming that Lewis Carroll owned the books first. Then a member of the Dodson family had the books, and perhaps came down to the Tregascus store and sold them a few items, including these books. Tregascus was actually James and Mary Lee Tregascus. It was Mary Lee, it was her husband's store at first. Mary Lee inherited it, and James married in. James was actually a founding member of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association, and was the man who seconded the motion to name it such. Next enters Louis Montague, second Baron Swathling. Well, he wouldn't become the second Baron Swathling until later, so we should just call him Louis Montague now. His father was a rich Jewish banker. He was mocked for changing his name from Samuel to the more uppity Montague. Montague's account books are in the University of Southampton, and we can see here that for July 14th, for 1898, he writes, Tregascus, Alice in Wonderland, £30. He's getting a good deal here. The catalogue had 40 guineas, so he's getting £10 off plus 10 shillings off. Next in the account books, we see January 11th, Fine Art Society, £30, 13 shillings, 10 pence. Well, that can no doubt be the drawings that will be tipped inside the so-called file copy. There was a man at the Fine Art Society by the name of Ernest Brown. He is known to have dealt with John Tenniel drawings. And the Fine Art Society still has their books for what they were selling in their shows. And Montague at that date did not buy anything from a show, which had nothing to do with John Tenniel. So they are most likely these stock items, if you will. I'm showing you 3 of the 10 that will be tipped into the book. Next in Montague's account books, we see this entry. For February 23rd, Riviere, Binding of Alice, £3, 6 shillings, 6 pence. And there we see the binding. We can see it's dated on the spine 1865. All the true first editions are dated 1865. The second printing of the first edition are all dated 1866 on the title page. On the inside front cover, right around here, we can see this, bound by Riviere and Son for L.S. Montague, 1899. They spelled Montague wrong. It does not have an E on the end. And this is how they tipped in the illustrations. They inserted a page, and they cut out a rectangle, and they glued the drawing to the edges. In this way, you can see the back, if there is anything on the back. Teneal most likely supplied the captions at this date. These are probably not from 1864 or so. And you can see also that this page has a purple line down the side. These purple lines are throughout the book, and they correlate to the Nursery Alice, which is a shorter version of the book for younger readers. A man by the name of William H. Bond figured that out. But that information was actually forgotten for a time, and then it was thought that those purple lines were by an editor at Macmillan. So it was thought to be Macmillan's file copy. But we know that is now wrong, so we call it the so-called file copy. In fact, Carroll could have asked for this book from Macmillan. He is known to have asked for uncut copies of his books. And he actually asked Macmillan to send an uncut copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland to Teneal to work on the Nursery Alice. So we could put Macmillan up here, and it could be a file copy. But Carroll could have owned it from the get-go as well. Now, the drawings have a different provenance. John Tenniel to the Fine Art Society, Ernest Brown. And I suspect that Ernest Brown was actually the one who put this together. The account books, Montague's account books, show that he's putting it together, but he may have been directed by Ernest Brown what to buy. And then, of course, Louis Montague. We'll just stick that all in here. Teneal had a nephew at Riviere, the binder, and that is perhaps why Teneal's authentication of the drawings appears here on the half-title page. And there's also a Teneal signature in the back of the book, and there's actually another one thrown in the front of the book. This is the one in the back. I found an old copy of this half-title page, old photograph in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. And you can see that there's a clipping here. It's no longer with the book. That newspaper clipping doesn't even make a burn, an acidic burn on the page, as we can see. So it may have been loose with the book at some time and gotten lost. It's the clipping is about how the drawings were once in a fire at Riviere. Some of Carroll's proofs that were from his auction got burned, and you can see those proofs today with burn marks on them in the Rosenbach. Well, Montague dies, and the books go to his wife, Lady Swathling. She is no doubt sitting in the Carlton Hotel lobby with a man named Dr. A. Rosenbach. Rosenbach was a famous book dealer at the time from Philadelphia. And she wrote out this formal contract. I hereby authorize Dr. A. Rosenbach to dispose of my Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass with Teneal's original drawings for £6,000. Gladys Swathling, May 28th. May 21st. Now, she writes that word, dispose. I find that word very interesting. Well, she also mentions that she has an Through the Looking Glass, right? Well, what is that? Here it is. This is actually not the book. This is a case for the book. And as you can see, it matches the Wonderland. Also, it has 22 drawings tipped into it. And Montague didn't have it rebound. It could have been, well, let me just open up the book and I'll show you. Well, it's sort of a contender to be rebound. But kind of nicely, he didn't have a rebound. He just had the case made. So he had these matching books. And they go to Rosenbach on consignment. And I believe on consignment, right? So we'll put the him in parentheses here. Rosenbach sells them to Elridge R. Johnson. He's the owner and founder of the Victor Talking Machine Company, which you may know best for this logo. At the Rosenbach, they have their account books still. And you can see the sale of the file copy to Johnson in this neat scrawl by some clerk or accountant. Every sale was written in these account books. And you can see the first item is for £15,400. That's the underground manuscript. When Rosenbach was in London meeting Lady Swathling, he was also there to go to an auction where Alice Little herself, the older Alice Hargreaves, was selling her manuscript that Carroll wrote down for her. And Rosenbach bought it for £15,400 at the auction. And he's selling it at cost to Johnson here, plus 10%. You will read that he sold it to Johnson for twice the value. Not true. Also at the same auction, he bought another 1865 copy of Wonderland for £5,000. And he's selling it at cost to Johnson. That's the Mrs. Craik. Carroll inscribed it to Mrs. Craik. Third and last is our file copy. He's selling it for £7,500 to Johnson. Now remember, he bought it for $6,000, so he's making more. He's selling it for more. And this was Rosenbach's usual practice, to charge at cost what he's buying at an auction, which would be in the newspaper. The prices would be known to his clients, and so he would only charge 10% more. But here is a private deal he's making with Lady Swathling, so he can up the price if he wants, right? From $6,000 to $7,500. Here are the costs in U.S. $20. We can see that our file copy is half the value of the manuscript. That wouldn't be true today, I doubt. Now, some of you have probably noticed, I forgot about something, right? What happened to that Through the Looking Glass? It's not sold to Johnson here. If it were, it would look fine, right? He's making $15,000 more plus 10% more. He's making, off this, he's making 25%. This is a 25% increase plus the 10, which is actually compounds to 37.5%. Well, it would have been fine if he threw the Looking Glass in here, but he didn't. Rosenbach actually kept it. And what I believe happened was he meant it to go to Johnson. But this sale is actually made by his brother in Philadelphia. Rosenbach had a brother in Philadelphia named Philip. And while Rosenbach was in London, they were communicating through cablegram. And one brother, it seemed, thought the Swathling Alice was 2 books, Rosenbach himself. And the other brother, Philip, in Philadelphia, thought of the Swathling Alice was just 1 book, and they miscommunicated. And when Rosenbach gets home, my theory is, I'm not sure this is true, but my theory is that he saw how he was tricked by his brother, so he tricked Lady Swathling as well, and just wrote Sold Alice. Ambiguous, right? Well, she's being paid in full here. £3,000 plus £3,000 later. Paying off in 2 installments was normal for the time. No trick there. But what did she think when she read this, right? She's getting paid in full. So I believe she thought that both books were sold. We can even see that 5 years later, Rosenbach is writing Arthur A. Houghton Jr. a letter, and he forgets what happened. He writes, "It was Lady Swathling who owned the 2 great copies of the 1865 Alice which I sold to Mr. Elridge Johnson. Well, that's not true, right? He got the other 1865 Alice from the auction. So he's misremembering here. And we often do this. We go back to our previous notion of something, even when we accept the correction. Even when someone corrects us or we see that we're wrong, we kind of fall back on that previous thought. So while he was in London all that time, he thought he sold the 2 books to Johnson. So he goes back here. This is just, I'm adding this in as a footnote. I don't want to get too far off our story. There's many documents about this in the Rosenbach. This is maybe a devious way to look at it, but it's a possible way to look at it. So let's get back to our story. Well, Johnson dies in 1945, and the books are now go to auction. His auction is held in 1946. And there's these men there at the auction. There's John Fleming. He works with Rosenbach. They're a team. They work together. And then there's Arthur A. Houghton Jr. He is not actually that man there. This photograph is from a 1941 auction, I believe. So we're just pretending this is our 1946 auction. This is actually Rosenwald. So he looks enough like Houghton that we're going to pretend that it's him. And this man, Francis A. Katana, was there as well. Now, after the manuscript was sold at this auction, which Rosenbach got, Fleming remembers what happens next. He writes in a biography he wrote about Rosenbach. He writes what happens with the file copy. Katana sat next to them, Rosenbach, Fleming, and Houghton, but left after the manuscript underground was sold to go to the back of the room to bid against the doctor on the next lot, the 1865 Alice. He bought it against Rosenbach after pumping Fleming and promising him the bid. Now I'm told that promising him the bid means that Katana was going to allow Fleming and Rosenbach to bid for him, and then he would pay them a commission. But if he's there, well, why wouldn't he do his own bidding, right? Now, you could read it another way, that Katana got Fleming to admit what his high price would be. Well, maybe he was doing that to know if he should move to the back of the room so he wouldn't have to uncomfortably sit next to someone he was bidding against. Since Katana got the books, it's really no harm, no foul, in my opinion. So I'm defending Katana. So Francis A. Katana gets the books. I'm saying books because he bought as well the next lot, which was the Craik 1865. So Katana got 2 items here, 2 1865 editions. And we can see that the Rosenbach still they have 3 copies of the Johnson Catalogue, and all 3 have annotations, pencil annotations in them. This was most likely written at the auction. Katana got the file copy for $23,000, and he bought the Craik for $7,500, which is roughly a 3-to-1 ratio, which is going to come in. That's important later on. We can see there's a pencil in Fleming's hand here to mark that catalog up. Well, Katana dies in the mid-1970s, and there's an auction in 1980 in Paris at the Hotel Drouot. And our item is lot 125, I believe. And our book is in this last lot. But it's not the only thing in the lot. There's 4 items, 4 Carroll-related items. And the two main items are the 2 1865s, the Craik and our file copy. And there's this poem thrown in and this watercolor by John Tenniel thrown in. And there's a man there. He's not there to buy for himself this lot. He's there representing someone else. And that is John Fleming himself, who is there, 34 years later, bidding on the file copy yet again. Well, when the Katana's widow had the books, it is rumored that a man from a representative of the British Railway Pension Fund offered her, for those two 1865 editions, $250,000. Now, that dollar sign seems to have got lost. And the books went to a Swiss investment group to be sold at auction. And they applied francs, mistakenly, to that number instead. Okay? So they're greatly undervalued. 4 francs equaled $1 at this time. So they should have been valued at 1,000,000 francs. So they're greatly undervalued. Then the auction happens, and the opening bid at the auction, it was a long day at the auction. Everything was going over estimate, making a lot of money. They were going over time. And this is the last lot, remember. And the bid is opening bid is only 220,000 francs. Well, Fleming here, he takes that opening bid. Didn't have to, but he took that opening bid. And then the auctioneer banged down his gavel and said, "Finis," and walked off the stage. So Fleming got the books. And he got them for Justin G. Schiller. Okay, so Justin G. Schiller is getting a good deal here. First, they're undervalued. And second, nobody was allowed to bid against Fleming. He also was lucky enough. Well, he tells me that he was willing to pay 3 times as much for this lot. More than 3 times as much. That's what he got. Now, he also lucked out in another way. He wanted to sell off 25% of this lot before the auction. Whatever he got for this, if he won the lot, someone would have to pay him 25% of the bid, and they would get these 2 items. They would get the poem and the crake, and they can do whatever they want to do with it. Schiller was only really after the file copy. He wanted it for his personal collection. Schiller is a book dealer, but he wanted the file copy for his own personal collection, and he was going to finance that by selling 25% off. Now, he could have profited greatly from this because nobody took him up on the offer. Maggs declined, and Quaritch declined the offer. Even Fleming himself said thanks but no thanks. And even William Self was considering buying this crake because William Self had an 1865, but he thought he could have a better one. To make a long story short, the crake ends up in Princeton. This with a private collector, the poem with a private collector. And this drawing, this watercolor, ends up with George Lucas, the film director and film producer. So Schiller has the book, and he has it for 18 years. But then he decides to sell his Lewis Carroll collection. And that is December 1998. And it is as well the last lot. And it is bought by a private collector. Here are all the values and lot numbers and dates and places. I'm putting here the $2020. Now, this is actually for 2 books, remember, the crake. So if we take that 75.25, which the reason why Schiller is using those numbers is because that's what Katana bought them for when they were sold separately, auctioned separately. So that's a fair estimate. So we'll take 75% of that and put it here. But we should put an asterisk here because, well, that Through the Looking Glass went to Rosenbach, sort of for free. Now there's some missing entities here. I believe there's some entities between, there's family and maybe a consortium here. And we know, as described, that Katana, they went to the widow and then the Swiss investment group, I suppose. The Schiller Catalogue was very generous. They showed all 10 of the drawings at the original size. But on the backs of these two, there are drawings they did not show in the catalog. I've seen these drawings at the Rosenbach in bad photographs, say, but the private collector that now owns the book has scanned them for me, and I can show you what they look like. As we can see, we know what this drawing is, right? The rabbit scurrying away while Alice is sitting in the pool of tears. We can see that the binder didn't care about the drawing on the back. He's centering the drawing on the front, right? That's why we have this wide area. And he doesn't care about the back, which is obviously more here I'd love to see. And this just happens to be some scribble on the back. And in the catalog, they actually write, apparently unrelated to the Alice cycle of illustrations. As you can see, it's just a scribble. But this scribble, I turned it around one day. I took a closer look at it. I want you to do. I want you to take a closer look at it now as well. If you know the Alice books well, pause the video and decide to yourself, is this apparently unrelated to the Alice cycle of illustrations? And then I'll be back and I'll tell you what I think. Okay, remember at the end of the book, Alice found herself lying on the bank with her head in the lap of her sister, who was gently brushing away some dead leaves that had fluttered down from the trees onto her face. And then Alice runs away, and the sister remains, and she imagines once again the tiny hands were clasped upon her knee. Okay, well, we have Alice lying on the bank here. We have the older sister here. We have with the head in the lap, with her head in the lap, right? I can make that out. You can see elbows here. Dead leaves fluttered down. Well, that's a dead leaf, possibly, from the trees. And this is perhaps a tree here. Brushing away from her face. Well, that's not on her face. Oh, wait. She has a second right hand, right? It's on her face. Hands clasped upon her knee. Yeah, I can see that. So every word of that sentence is illustrated here. Every word. And even from the beginning of the book, remember, the sister is reading some boring book with no pictures or conversations in it. And obviously, I don't see any pictures or conversations in this book. But we can see that spine and that edge of the book. And there's a before and after effect. There seems to be a half Alice here. Remember, the binder didn't care about the back. He's just cutting this out. Cuts right down here. But there's obviously more here. There's a full Alice. So maybe she's awake. And then there's this casual observer on the right. Well, what is that? He seems like he's leaning back, casually looking on at the scene. I see wings here. He's also nude. Well, if Teneal draws a nude, it is a nude. Why do I say that? Well, he wasn't classically trained. Henry Holiday was classically trained. When he drew the bellman for The Hunting of the Snark for Lewis Carroll, he first drew him nude. He had a model in, a young man. And we can see that. And then he drapes the nude. That's how classically trained artists will work. But Tenniel wasn't classically trained. So if he draws a nude, it is a nude. So what does this add up? We have a casual observer with wings who is nude. Well, that must be a Greek god, right? And what Greek god could that be? Well, Morpheus, the god of sleep and dreams. Tenniel seems to have thought maybe he would be a statue or a ghostly image in the back, looking on. I also suspect maybe he was doing a double-page title page of some sort. But this is interesting in that it's the only example we have of John Tenniel contemplating drawing something that he didn't end up using in the book. There is no other example we have of this. And though I have stuffed your teapots with an dormouse amount of information, believe me, this is the short version of the story. I've possibly left out more than I included.